This is the first episode in a series of video podcasts that I'm hoping to do on similar subjects. The following is a conversation with Ryan Parks. Ryan's done a lot of research with ancient China and ancient Israel and kind of finding the relationship, a shared common tradition that might be hidden under the surface of history. I find his work incredibly compelling. It's based off of a book that he just published. I highly recommend it for anyone. It's called Ancient China and the Hebrew Connection. It's found on Amazon. I'll have a link in the description below. I think it's a great piece of academic work. It takes a very objective look at these pieces of evidence, both into both of these cultures' creation myths, both of their traditions, sacrificial traditions, and I think it's a really compelling case that there is more to be discovered in the connection between these two religions and these two cultures. So I'd highly recommend anyone checking that out. If you're interested, please subscribe, like, and comment. I'd love to hear some feedback as we prepare for more episodes where hopefully I continue to learn how to have these conversations and to find these compelling and really amazing stories. So I hope you enjoy. I think it would be nice to start off, Ryan, if you kind of introduce yourself and kind of your research background, your academic background, and what led you to this point, and then we can jump into some questions.
Sure. So as far as my research background goes, I've been interested in China since about third grade. and I've been over there lots of times, and I lived a year there with my family. I have a son that was born in Beijing, and I'm fascinated by Chinese history, and that's what my degrees are in. I have a master's in history, focus on China, and a bachelor's I got at BYU. And so one of the things that you had asked me before was, how this whole thing started, and that gets into my own history. Basically, as a kid, I would look at my box cars that I would play with, and it would say made in China on the bottom of them, and all of my toys were made in China, almost. And I remember thinking, who are these people, and why are all my toys made there and not in the United States? And that started early. I did a report on China in third grade. I even wrote the Communist Party and asked them for information that I could present, and of course they didn't answer. But anyway, so I spent a lot of time over there. My main interest was, where do these people come from? How do they fit into the whole story of the gospel of Jesus Christ? And we've got the Bible, and to leave out such a large group of God's children, how does that work? You know what I mean? Obviously, there's a big story here that hasn't been told yet. And so that's when I went into to do my master's thesis. I wanted to know where they came from and how it all fit together. So I started pouring through the China's ancient documents, which not a lot of people do, especially in the West. They're very lengthy, they're very difficult, very old, and I thought it was fascinating. And so I started looking through there and looking for parts of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and I just hit a jackpot, honestly. Just tons of stuff. And I suppose if you didn't have a paradigm shift, that the idea that that they have no Judeo-Christian background, like almost everyone assumes, then you wouldn't even look for it. But I thought there must be a connection back, and sure enough, there is. There is more than a connection. There's a lot of connections.
Yeah, I've kind of found that when we think of Eastern religions, we think of them as being quite distant from us, disconnected. The story runs separately. And also, I think the challenge is that it's hard for most people in the West to be exposed to Chinese history and Chinese beliefs, because like you said, the texts are difficult to understand. For most people, they need to be translated. Most people I I imagine don't understand ancient Chinese manuscripts. But that's what I loved about the book. And I'd like to intro the book a little bit. I'll share my screen and show, and just show those who might be interested. The book is Ancient China's Hebrew Connection, over 200 compelling correlations that tie ancient China to ancient Israel. You just released it a few weeks ago. I picked it up a few days later, read through it. I thought it was great. It's a very enjoyable and informative read that kind of goes one by one, piece by piece, the parallels that you can find. One thing I really appreciated as I read through, your use of primary sources, I thought was excellent. You go to really the roots of the Chinese tradition and the roots of the Hebrew tradition and use those fundamental texts. I also thought it was very academic in that sometimes these kinds of books can get into the fringe of providing evidence, but then drawing conclusions for the reader, where one thing I really appreciate about your book is that you provide the evidence, but you leave some questions open-ended for the reader to interpret what this might mean, what the implications of this might be. I don't know, Jonathan, if you got a chance to read it as well, and if you had similar insights, but
I read through about 20 pages.
Yeah, so I thought it was great, and I am excited for this opportunity to kind of talk more in depth about what you found and how this kind of came to be.
Sounds good.
Yeah, so the first kind of question, so my exposure to what we often refer to as Confucianism is pretty limited, but anytime I've been exposed to it, it's kind of been explained as more of a philosophy than a theology. And one thing I really enjoyed about this book is it kind of opened up that Confucianism is a bit of a misnomer, that this tradition was around far before Confucius, and that he was just a good contributor of it. And also that it's much more than just a philosophy. It's much more than just a way of life. There is actually a theological belief structure at the root of this religion, and that the other Chinese religions, Taoism and Buddhism, kind of inherit things from this shared tradition. I was wondering why you think today we kind of look at Confucianism like that, not so much as a religion as much of a way of life.
So that's a great question, and it really boils down to one thing, and it's the misinterpretation of the word Tian. Tian, in this time at this time currently means heaven. And so if you go back and you read the ancient documents, and each time the word Tian comes along, you interpret as heaven, you miss the whole picture. And the word Tian in ancient China was the name of their god. It wasn't heaven. You could use it for heaven, but it was actually the second name of their god Shangdi. And that is understood by few. So as soon as you reinterpret that word Tian and turn it into a person instead of the sky, then everything changes. In fact, I'm going to show you what the word Tian looks like in ancient Chinese. And you're not going to believe it because it looks like I'm doing something else. But that is the character Tian in ancient Chinese. Okay, it's not the sky. And in fact, the modern character, I'll write right next to it. This right here is the modern character, and this is the ancient character. It meant their god, and they believe their god was in the an anthropomorphic god, in the shape of a human. And so if you understand this, then you understand every time they say Tian, they're talking about their God and not heaven. That changes the whole story. And that's one thing that I discovered and wrote this book. This is my own findings, and it's generally misunderstood.
As Caleb probably knows, Ten no Kami-sama means the God, or the God of heaven in Shinto, but it would make just as much sense for it to be Ten no Kami, which would be the God. So, yeah.
Yeah, and along those same lines
Right.
too,
And
this,
I actually, that's kind of a good.
go ahead.
Oh, you go ahead. I'll follow up.
Well, it's more than just a god in the ancient Chinese too. Some people do understand, some scholars do understand that ancient China was clearly monotheistic. I mean, there's no question. And that was the name of their god. And the other name of their god, which is the same god, is Shangdi. So it was Shangdi and Tian were two names for the same god. The Tian version was probably a little more respectful, a little more a little more formal, and or less formal. And so that's why there was two. But all the other thing that's not well understood, but very much the case, is everything else underneath that god were called spirits. And everything in ancient China had a spirit. The mountain did, the hill did, the river did, the planets did, the sun did, everything had a spirit. And the name for those spirits is called Shun. And but that same name is the same name of spirits of humans that die. They're all also called Shun. So all of the Shun below that god were spirits, and they were not even close to the same plane as Shangdi or Tian. So because of that, if you understand that clearly, then you have one god and all the spirits below that are governed by it, including those that have died. And even though they pay respects to them, they pay respects to the Shun. They'll burn paper money modernly, or anciently it was other animal sacrifices. But even though they give respect to them, it's more like the Catholic Church and their saints, right? They also do prayers and things to those saints, but they're not the same as the god they're trying to reach, which is named Shangdi or Tian. It's very similar to that situation.
That was definitely one of the biggest things for me, is that hierarchy. It doesn't seem clear until you kind of laid out that it's very clear in these texts that Shangdi was above. There was no god that was second. There was no god at the same level. There was a clear hierarchy where Shangdi was at the top and all these other spirits were below, which I think is fascinating.
Shinto, of course, means the path of spirits or the road of spirits.
So yeah, I think that root understanding is helpful. And then you laid out very helpfully, the first section is kind of how the attributes of Shangdi as described in the 5 ancient texts line up pretty closely to the attributes of Jehovah in the Old Testament, which I thought was really compelling. Kind of speaking to those connections throughout sacrifices offered to some of the historical figures. But of those 200 connections, which ones to you were the most significant, the most, there's some really here when you found them?
So there's a lot of very specific connections that are impossibly a coincidence. And I could go into a bunch of those, but I think I want to answer that with what I consider the most interesting. To me, the most interesting is the connections between the Hebrew Passover and the Chinese New Year. There is just a lot to unpack there. The length of the days, well, I'll just mention a little briefly of this, Jonathan. You haven't read this section yet, but I continue to find more pieces to that puzzle, even since a few weeks ago. I'll mention a couple of those, but so basically you have the New Year and the preparations for the New Year. They do this really meticulous cleaning of their house. It's a special ritual of just cleansing their house and removing all dirt or dust out of their home. And in preparation for the evening, their whole family comes together. They offer sacrifices and have a feast. And then at midnight, they set off fireworks modernly, but anciently, they of course didn't do that before they had fireworks, but they give their children red envelopes at midnight, and they put red banners on their doorposts and lintels, their door headers. And because there's a monster that comes by that night, a destroying spirit called Tian, that visits at midnight, and it kills children and livestock. The same as you see in the Hebrew tradition. And then the next, by the way, that feast that they, interestingly enough, that feast they have the night before, they actually leave an empty place setting. And for those that couldn't make it, which is kind of an interesting tie also. But the following morning, they congratulate each other in modern Chinese, it's just a New Year greeting called Gongxi Gongxi, where they put their hands together and say congratulations. And it meant that they were spared from Tian, the monster, the spirit that came by that night, and weren't, slain. And then they have 7 days of rest from labor. This is I'm still talking the Chinese version and not the Hebrew. Of course, we know in the Hebrew they have the 7 days of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and then they go back to work after that. But the ties are so fascinating, and also if you peel back the years among the Chinese, you find that in the past, the Chinese will tell you themselves that anciently it was blood on their doorposts and door header that scared away the monster that night, and not red paper. There was also some times where blood was put on paper and then put on the doorpost and door header, which is obviously a tie to that, and an easier solution than actually putting blood on your doorpost and door header each year. But yeah, to me, that's got to be one of the most fascinating connections, and it gives a lot of evidence and ties to when this could have been passed over to the Chinese from the Hebrews. And Caleb, you've read this already, but Jonathan, the name of the Chinese New Year in Chinese is called the Passover of the Tian. That's its name in Chinese. That's the formal name of the Chinese New Year. And so, clearly that was passed on to the Chinese.
Of Tian.
Go ahead,
or
John.
Tian?
Tian.
So that's great. It's Tian in this case. Tian is the name of their god with a T, and Tian is the name of the spirit that passes on the New Year. Now, interestingly enough, before and you would know this, before the Babylonian captivity of the Hebrews, their Passover was at the beginning of their year. And then after the Babylonian captivity, their calendar changed, and it became their New Year was in the fall. So that's another clue about when, Hebrews went in, transferred this tradition into China. It would suggest that it was before the Babylonian captivity, because that was when the Passover took place at the time of the Hebrew New Year. And so logically speaking, that it would have been more likely to have been passed into China before the Babylonian captivity. Now, interestingly enough, the ancient Chinese texts say nothing about the Chinese New Year. And it's the biggest, most important holiday in China by far. And so clearly there would have been dialogue about the Chinese New Year if it were a holiday when the texts were written. So those texts get finished up about maybe 900 BC. And so if you just assume that the Chinese New Year wasn't in China, the holiday the way it is now, before when the texts were being written, because there's no sign of it, then that would put the transfer of the tradition sometime between the 6th and 9th century BC, which interestingly enough would have been the same era as when the northern 10 tribes were hauled off, which maybe that's how it happened. Some of the tribes ended up in China. That would be a logical conclusion.
Yeah, and I think that's a the lost 10 tribes influence these Eastern religions. And sometimes it can be difficult. I think comparative religion can sometimes be kind of volatile field in that there's a lot of skepticism and criticism and accusations of biases. So that kind of leads to this question of how do you think this kind of work would be received in the academic world? In my limited, I guess, exposure, I'm still in the undergraduate program, but there seems to be certain dogmas, especially around history, around religious history, in kind of the between the ancient Chinese and the ancient Hebrews. To me, it feels like that would challenge a lot of the dogmas. How do you think, these kinds of things, these kinds of understandings, discoveries impact the kind of academic world and understanding?
That's a great question. And unfortunately, there's a massive divide between religious thought and secularism. And it's been that way a long time. And neither one welcomes the other in the least, right? So as soon as you start talking religious in any way, they're out of there. They're not interested. And as soon as you start talking secular in a religious setting, people aren't interested usually. There's a real divide there. And unfortunately, academia is not as honest as it should be. If you were to approach subjects with complete honesty and a true desire to know what happened, what really happened, then you need to go into it with a very open mind. And I just don't see that. I don't see that in academia. That, open mind in academia means being non-religious, right? And that's nonsense. If you have a truly open mind, then you're open to any type of philosophy that the evidence points toward, the evidence points to. So I just don't see that in the academic field, a true open mind to whatever the evidence points to, which is unfortunate. And instead I see more of a sort of self-validation and a lot of positioning and attempts to further one's space in that field. A lot of jockeying for I'm the expert in this, and whenever there's a quote unquote expert, you don't question them, you just believe them instead of going against them. And if you do say something else, you're likely to not, they'll just not include you. It's been the case forever. I opened my book with the Confucius quote, all men think they're wise, and it's true. It's true. It's very difficult to be open-minded and actually look at where evidence points with an open mind, even for me and for anyone else. But some are better at it than others. And unfortunately, the academic field is a lot less open-minded than it should be.
I have a comment.
Yeah.
Can be said. His description of academia isn't a lot unlike academic seminarians who study the Word of God and have declared certain things that are absolute, settled science, and there's nothing that could be further from the truth in the study of the Hebrew New Testament. Especially, as an LDS background, it makes no sense to me that the New Testament was originally written in Greek. It just doesn't make any sense. I always assumed it was Hebrew because Jesus was in that time and the scriptures were written in Hebrew. And certainly, sure enough, Hebrew scriptures are coming to the fore at this time. Now, it didn't happen until now. In fact, I just discovered a new manuscript in Freiburg, Germany, that holds the complete New Testament, and it is so radically different from the assumptions. So I think this is about timing. What you're talking about, Ryan, is restoration happens now in the second Exodus, or the second invitation from God. Joseph Smith, in our viewpoint, began it, and it'll take us to finish it. But we'll do so with knowledge and with new tools like we've never seen before.
Right. And I think to both of your points, I think to both of your points, it's important to realize that our knowledge is like an iceberg, in that what we understand and about these cultures is a really small portion of what was actually there. So much of it is lost and obscured, is hidden mysteries and lost, to time and to conquest and to cultural shifts, especially with China. The Cultural Revolution that happened in the 20th century, the kind of erasure of a lot of the ancient Chinese traditions and beliefs and practices. One thing I find somewhat, I guess, promising, I mean, China's a hot topic politically now. There's a lot of kind of fear, but I think it's promising. I took a survey on Eastern religions this last semester, and our professor spoke about the rise of Christianity in China, that it's actually accepted quite readily. It grows very quickly there. So Ryan, for you, what do you kind of think could be the implication to the Chinese people with a better understanding maybe of this cultural heritage that's it's still there with the Chinese New Year, but maybe the origins of it are obscured from them still. What do you think could be the implications of them, better understanding of that?
That's a great question. So the Chinese don't know who they are themselves because of what you just described, the cultural revolutions, the just disruptions in their cultural history that have been so extreme, that it's broken down who they are, and they've kind of separated themselves from their history and traditions. And for a Chinese Christian, when they embrace Christianity, to them it's something that's elsewhere that they learned of. They have no idea that a lot of their heritage is the same. And so I think this is the book is an opportunity to show the Chinese people, the ones that do get a hold of it and can know about it, that they don't have to look at their heritage as, for lack of a better word, pagan, or something outside of the realm of what they now believe, but understand that the ancient Chinese and them have a lot. Once they've embraced that, they have a lot in common, and that their forefathers had faith in God and tried to do good, and that there's no reason to leave that behind when you come into Christianity and a more full understanding.
Yeah, I think that's great. I'm more accustomed, or I guess more familiar with the Japanese. That's for a few years I've been studying. Christianity hasn't taken hold in Japan in the same way it has in China. It doesn't grow with the same strength, partly because I think they don't see the connections as much. But I think studies like these, studies of the connection between ancient Japan and the Hebrews and all these other cultures, are really important in bringing, to me, I think we think of the history of the world as these kinds of separate threads that developed over time. And, anthropologists will tell you, they might tell you that, each civilization creates its own deities, and they're all. And so often, people who are critical of religion might say, well, you believe in God, but which one? All these cultures have different gods. But I think it's interesting to go at it with a perspective that maybe it's actually one shared story that was fractured at a time, and that we can actually trace all these things back to a shared heritage or shared lineage. And I think this book's a great method of doing that.
One
I,
comment I'd make,
yeah.
Caleb.
Mhm.
You and I went to Japan, and we saw a process of proselytizing them from a developed Christianity that we inherited, which we believe that we have that, that beginning, but there's so much more to restore. And what the word Torah means to turn to God. And Torah is the first 5 books of the Old Testament. When our scriptures and our traditions do not contradict Torah, we are scraping at the bottom. We're scraping at the root. And so what Brian has been talking about is scraping there at Torah. When we turn to God in the nations to where we have been driven, all of us, our ancestors also are Hebraic. Chinese are Hebraic, and the Japanese are Hebraic. You can see in the Japanese the Levitical tradition of building the temples. You can see in the traditions of the Chinese of their ancient god worship, Yehovah, the Torah. And so when we use that book instead of our developed Christianity books, Chinese are going to listen and the Japanese are going to listen because it will resonate in their spirits.
It is. It's the core. It's the core. And that core, like Caleb said, exists throughout the world, anciently and spun into the modern era. And you're right. There is, I believe, one story that's got branches instead of separate stories.
It's exciting to me. So I had a few other questions that might be a little bit different. I personally, one thing I always liked, and I wish I was more familiar with, is the study of kanji, which is the Japanese inherit the Chinese alphabet and still use it to this day. But that and you mentioned it briefly in your book a few times, but that there are really kind of even remnants of our stories from the Bible in the characters and the language. You talked a little bit about Tian, but are there any others that kind of have stuck out to you?
Yeah, so I'm quite familiar with that and read everything I could find on that topic. I didn't include it very much just because of the circumstantial nature of the evidence instead of solid, primary source. I do believe that you can understand the early meanings, but it wasn't strong enough for me to include, except for in a few instances. Like, for instance, sacrifice in Chinese, the character literally means, perfect lamb or bullock killed and put on an altar. That's the actual components of the character are those. And there's a few others like that as well. But one of the most popular ones that I saw was the word for ship, which in the character it says an 8-person vessel. And a lot of people point to the ark, was an 8-person vessel, and that's surely the ark type, the ship of all ships. And so and the character says an 8-person vessel. So are they referring to the ark? Maybe. But since it's circumstantial somewhat, I did not include things like that, just because I needed to make my story that I put together just as heavily documented and with few moments that I left the main part of the trunk of the information out very far. And in that, I wanted it to be as let other people take it from there.
Right, which I actually really appreciate. I kind of mentioned it before, but reading it, I don't think someone reading your book could tell what religious background necessarily you came from, or at least which denomination, because you kind of leave out the interpretation and you stick to the core books, because once you get past the Torah, then the different religions kind of start having their own interpretations or their own texts. It gets a little bit messy with the disagreements, but because you
Right.
stuck to those kind of core documents on both sides, I think that gives a lot of strength to the book, which is great, because I think in all of these things, it's also important to not get siloized into your denominations. That creates kind of just these echo chambers where people from the same, sect of Christianity or sect of Judaism all just talk to each other and create their own interpretation of events, where I think we could find a lot to benefit from a broader perspective, seeing, hey, maybe we all share something that's greater than our specific interpretations of all these things.
Well, and if you stay with the core, like Jonathan said, that core is shared with almost everyone already.
Yeah. One thing, I guess, before we go, one of my personal favorite connections you found was between Fushi and Nuwa and Adam and Eve, the story of Adam and Eve kind of found. I'll share my screen really quickly, just because I thought this was one of my favorite pieces you include in the book. This image here, this piece of art, I think from the Tian dynasty, or Tang dynasty.
This is Han Dynasty. That would have been 200 BC to 280 roughly. Yeah.
I guess I was reading, you read through kind of the connections that you draw, but then you see this painting, and almost immediately you kind of see the implication, the connection, kind of the tie with the serpent's tails, and then they hold what appears to be tools like a compass and a square, which shows up in Western symbology, Western Judeo-Christian symbology. And so personally, that was one of my favorite parts of the book, was when you kind of talk about the connection to them, and also to Noah with the great you, I believe his name was.
Mm-hmm. Right. That's great. Yeah. Again, just not well understood. You have the linguistic barrier, but as far as the actual information goes, there's a lot of overlap between Fushi and Nuwa, Adam and Eve, Great You and Noah, and so much of their cultural history. I loved the creation accounts from ancient China that sound almost exactly, I mean, not almost exactly, but very similar to the creation account you find in Genesis. Just fascinating.
Yeah. Well, Ryan, I want to thank you again for agreeing to meet with us and kind of share this book. I would recommend anyone who might be watching this discussion to go out and get it. It's a really delightful read. It's a pretty easy read, and I like how it all builds on each other. And it seems that you've designed it purposely that way, like kind of the connections build on each other, so it's very easy to understand for someone who doesn't have necessarily the same background. But thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Caleb.
Yeah.